Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our latest edition of Rip from the Headlines. Good to be back after a week hiatus in a wonderful mission and visit and trip to Israel. This morning, we're going to cover a topic Rip from the Headlines in the age of can ChatGPT be your rabbi? So first we have to have kind of a definitional, discussion as to hopefully people know what ChatGPT is. So we gave a class about 15 months ago about the increasing use of artificial intelligence. And what's artificial intelligence? Well, artificial intelligence means it's not humans, it's computers being programmed to do things for us. And we talked about artificial intelligence. So for example, where you have these self-driving cars, that's artificial intelligence. You sit there, sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride as the car tries for you. Or the fact that your phone can be programmed to do certain things for you, play certain music at a certain time, or your home, your thermostat, your refrigerator, things can be programmed to operate on their own. There's a certain amount of automation, but artificial intelligence means that certain decisions are being made. It's not just automatic. You have a timer, the light goes on based on the way you set it. But for example, artificial intelligence would be that there are sensors in the kitchen that know which person is there, and based on how that person has adjusted the lights over the last month, the lights may be raised or dimmed based on that person's preferences. That's artificial intelligence. It's making the decision on its own without any type of human additional input. So that's the idea of artificial intelligence. So we spoke about certain aspects of artificial intelligence in terms of performing certain mitzvot, or artificial intelligence being employed based on our presetting it, or even our presence and the like. And we talked a little bit about that topic in particular. Recently, this idea of ChatGPT has made its way into the media. And you see it in source number one. President Herzog gives a speech partially written by ChatGPT. This is a headline from the Jerusalem Post a couple weeks ago. So just for definitional purposes, ChatGPT is a chatbot developed by OpenAI and launched in November 2022, so it's very recent. It's built on the idea language models and has been fine-tuned to basically respond, to chat with you, to talk to you. And you could ask it to do things for you. For example, if you're a student and you have you want some research done for you, or even want an essay written for you, you can say, here's the assignment, write an essay. Now, just like there's the ChatGPT will write the essay, there's software that can catch whether the essay has been written by ChatGPT. It's a kind of a related subject that these days, the software that is used by educators to catch plagiarism or to catch students handing in the same paper is kind of an extension or a counterbalance to this as well. But you're starting to have the opportunity, in addition to Google, which you can go to and pose a question and get answers or get information, ChatGPT will talk to you, will talk back to you, will answer questions, can give opinions and the like. And so just as the headline mentions in source number one, right? President Isaac Herzog on Wednesday openly gave a speech which was partially written by ChatGPT to the Cyber Tech Conference in Tel Aviv. Herzog said that both his opening and closing to the speech were written by ChatGPT, saying that the bots spun into action as a way of showing what he called the amazing achievements of the cyber and high-tech industries. Further, he said, not only are machines taking on tasks which once only humans could perform, they're performing tasks which humans could never dream could be done, pushing the boundaries of the imagination and of what is possible. Next, he said, we must never forget the human spirit. No computer can ever replace human DNA. Hardware and software cannot replace human will. He said that the ultimate challenge is to set our eyes on the horizon, but but on our fellow humans as well. So this idea that it's there, maybe this speech was written by ChatGPT, maybe it wasn't, right? How do we know? this brave new world you may not know without software or to to serve as a counterweight to whether this is actually human product or not. And this is the brave new world in which we live in. And while we spoke about the artificial intelligence being utilized for various mechanisms and actions, back 15 months ago, now we see ChatGPT, this new creation, this new innovation, being there to write articles, write textbooks, write speeches, and the like. And so we recognize that Herzog even mentions the idea that there's no computer can replace the human DNA, the human spirit. We have to connect to other people as well. But what about what is human about the religious nature of the human response within Judaism, within Torah? Should rabbis have their sermons written by ChatGPT? We'll see that one actually did, and what kind of response that he got. But that's the question. What is in a sense, that Judaism maybe foresaw this possibility, and certain regulations required a human touch or a human involvement. And maybe even with this idea of transmitting Torah, transmitting Jewish tradition, there is a requirement for that human engagement as well. So just a couple of headlines in the history of AI. Source number 2, 1956, John McCarthy coined the term artificial intelligence and had the first AI conference. 1969, Shaky was the first general purpose mobile robot built. It is now able to do things with a purpose versus just a list of instructions. 1997, supercomputer Deep Blue was designed, and it defeated the world champion chess player in a match. It was a massive milestone by IBM to create this large computer. 2002, first a commercially successful robotic vacuum cleaner was created. Right? Think of those people who have those little whatever they're called that go around the house and clean for you.
Rumba,
right. You can Zumba while it Rumbas. Then you have we have speech recognition, robotic process automation, dancing robots, smart homes, other innovations are making their debut. And then we're seeing linear fold AI algorithm to medical and scientific and medical teams developing vaccines. Right. Some of the ways they were able to run the numbers to create the COVID vaccine was they're able to run these numbers 120 times faster than other methods. So we're utilizing the ability of artificial intelligence in all sorts of ways that have progressed over the last 60 years or so. And what we're going to start looking at are some Jewish sources and approaches to the specific need for human involvement. And while as great as artificial intelligence is, and it could have tremendous, and has had tremendous impact, still where is the human touch required? Just any questions, comments, or reactions as we get started, just from the introduction.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Today, the Supreme Court is hearing a case by parents of a girl, 23, in France, who was killed in a terrorist attack. The parents are claiming in the Supreme Court that Google was responsible because it had incited the daughter to participate. Is this?
So look, we're talking about the technological age. There are algorithms at play in how messages are for people who are using social media. Really, it's more social media. It's actually not as much informational as it is communication and conversation. That when people, as it happens when people run searches also, so it's sometimes based on your previous search history that you'll get certain responses first. Or for anyone who uses social media like Facebook, that you sometimes open up your Facebook and you have all these things there. You'll notice there's a trend. Certain things are there more often than not. Certain people are there more often than not. So there's a whole algorithm at play that is utilized. And the question is, what kind of accountability is there? Almost parallels to the case that we saw when we first tackled this 15 months ago, right? For the self-driving cars, the autonomous cars to operate, they have to be programmed. And they have to be programmed with all types of if-then scenarios, right? And one of them would be if a car, people jump in front of a car, the car will swerve. So instead of hitting the bunch of people in front of it, it might hit one person. And therefore, the car has been programmed to essentially hurt one to save several, right? It's more important to save many than to save one. And we talked about how that plays out for the person programming it, because from a Jewish perspective, you're never allowed to even hurt one person, right? That's the famous, train scenario. If a train is barreling and there are 6 people tied to the tracks, and you can flip the switch and kill the one person tied to the tracks, according to Jewish law, that's not permissible, because you can't do an action that kills somebody. That's one of the cardinal sins. So there is a similar. This is all in the same same bandwagon of topics. Here in particular, we're talking more about these types of innovations that have kind of a direct user interface. You'll say, ChatGPT, I'd like you to please write a sermon about artificial intelligence, and it will give you something back. But it's a brave new world in which we live in, that's for sure. Okay, so let's look at some of the sources, some of the rabbinic approaches to the human touch and what constitutes being human. So there are a series of laws relating to shechita, slaughtering, that slaughtering requires human activity. The idea that it requires the action of the knife being drawn across the esophagus and the trachea. And not only the action of slaughter, but source number 3, the checking of a knife requires the use of the skin and fingernail from 3 angles. In other words, one must pass over it and draw it back over the flesh of his finger, and afterwards pass it back on one's fingernail from 3 different angles, which are its tip and both of its sides, so as to ensure it will not have a blemish at all. No nicks on the knife. After this, we check the knife slowly and with full concentration, not turning one's mind to other things, and then repeat on another nail slightly to check. So it's just interesting how the emphasis, and I bolded the words, you have to check the skin and fingernail, right? Machines don't have fingernails, right? It requires human activity for this to take place. And towards the end, this idea of full concentration, it talks about the idea of kavanah, of intent, or independent intent, the idea of b'chol leiv, with one's full focus, right? Only human beings have that type of an ability for now to be able to focus. So not so sure that the Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Karo back then may have been foreshadowing or foreseeing this technological innovation, but there is in halacha, in certain areas of halacha, the essential need for humanity and the human focus, the human idea of concentration that is required. That certainly when it comes to shechita would forestall the possibility of AI, because you don't have robots who have skin on their fingernail or the like, nor do they have this idea of full autonomous concentration. They've been programmed to do certain things. So there is, we do see the concept of a human being being needed for certain ideas. So if you need a human being, what is considered humanity? So we see Dr. John Loiki and Rabbi Moshe Tendler passed away over the last year and a half or so. Back in 2003, had an article about that we propose, according to halacha, a human being must possess at least one of the following 3 characteristics: having been formed within or born from a human, expressing moral intelligence, being capable of producing offspring with a human. Especially with all the research being done about growing human beings, right? Once upon a time, they have the term that they use with artificial insemination, the idea of a test tube baby. And now the way they're trying to actually grow organs and the like, They may have a different type of a test tube baby, a human being, a baby born outside of a human. And so, we see that these three categories, being formed within or from moral intelligence, or being able to also produce offspring, you got to have one of those three. And as far as science is currently going with artificial and advanced robotics, and even in science, it's going to be hard. We have yet moved. We have not yet seen science come up with something that will be human, that will be artificial. You don't have artificial humans that would qualify as humanity based on this definition, because they're not being robots. Are these are not coming from human beings. There's no kind of hybrid cyborg type of a creature that is yet to be on the drawing board. What we are making incredible innovations, but we're not there to the point that we would face a question that would leave us unsure based on this definition. And that's why those are the only that based on that definition, that's who can do that kind of shchita, because anything other than a human being would not qualify in this type of a scenario. And Rabbi Yosef Tzvi Rimon, writing just a couple of years ago, building upon some of these sources, the idea of the Shulchan Aruch and Shchita, as well as the definition of a human being, wrote that there's no question that AI is becoming increasingly sophisticated and is able to perform human activities with greater speed and efficiency, often at a lower cost. Nevertheless, computers are not infallible, and a doctor has something that AI lacks: human intuition. He approaches it maybe from another perspective, that in addition to the technical requirements of halakha for a human being, like in Shchita, and what qualifies as a human being, there's a certain subjective element that that machines do not have, that AI lacks, and that's human intuition. And this will take us into the realm of Rabbi ChatGPT, but we'll take any questions, comments, or reactions first.
Rabbi, ideally, society should decide on each specific type of scientific innovation whether the pluses are greater than the minuses.
Right. Well, sometimes it's gray. There are minuses, but the pluses outweighing the minuses can still end up utilizing things, but from a religious or a Jewish law perspective, they still may be somewhat fall short. Yes, Miriam.
So my question is really about intention versus exactness. It's possible that a machine would do a better job of checking a knife than a person. And also, I think of shmur matzah, it's probably a machine could probably be more exact about the 18 minutes than a human being.
Correct.
Yeah,
sorry.
So is it intention, or is it that the final product is perfect?
So I think that there's a little bit of that gets into the area of when halacha, when Jewish law and Jewish practice seem to require exactitude, whether that's exactitude from a scientific perspective or from what a person can see. So, for example, when it comes to shchita, so the shchita requires, or the knife requires a certain investigation, and it requires human investigation. If it says the finger, it requires that's mechanism. Now, one innovation that was in terms of tempering steel, when that started to evolve, and especially in the 19th century, began to evolve, you had sharper knives if they were fired and tempered. The Hasidim adopted using those types of knives because they were sharper, and if they're sharper, they're better. The Misnagdim, the anti-Hasidim, accused the Hasidim of being reformed by adapting to the modern technology of the sharper knives, and that was one of the areas of disagreement, the fact that they were quote unquote too modern, by adapting to something that technically would make for a better shchita. So there is that tension when trying to trying to fool the system or trying to make it better than has been done before can become difficult. The shmur matzah example would also be would be relevant. Now, there have been those who feel that machine matzah is better than hand matzah because of the fact that it's all done in a uniform way. Shmur matzah, the thickness could be different. Parts of it can be not be baked as uniformly or the like. And sometimes it comes up. Usually there is some quality control that takes place so you don't see it. But sometimes you can get a piece of shmur matzah that you can actually bend and tear apart, that because it's not fully baked. It goes in at too high a temperature for too short amount of a time, and it looks burnt, but it's not. So there are certain advantages to technology. The question is, when there is a human element that's required. When it comes to shmur matzah, I think the human element keeps us away. They're like, how can this be matzah? Right? How can this square matzah be used at the Seder? Even though you could actually find square shmur matzah. It's not hand-baked shmur matzah, because shmur is really about the flour than it is about being hand-baked or not. Okay. And so within the discussion of machine matzah and machine shmura, this issue comes up. I think that also, when you look at the square matzah, you don't think of it as traditional, right? Shmura, why does it have to be so round is a separate issue, but it's more of about production. It's not really completely circular. But there are those, I've heard rabbis suggest, use machine shmura matzah, because then you're more certain that there's no chametz possibility or problem, and that also obviates the whole gebracht conversation. Whether or not you can then worry about breaking up, putting it in water. So there's the technology piece on one side, and then there's the human element on the other. Sometimes they're connected, and we'll be better off with the more technologically advanced, precise mechanism. On the other side of things, there does seem to still be a human requirement. So far, we've seen it mostly in shchita or in certain other measurement type things where the human has to be involved in the measuring. And the halakha itself speaks about ways to make up for the fact that it's not precise. Just as an example, came across something studying recently, when they talk about measuring the distances between communities for the boundaries for Shabbos, they talk about you're supposed to take one piece of string here and 2,000 amos, you stretch a string to get to the next place. What happens if there's a tree in the middle? So they don't talk about mathematical calculations. They say, go around the tree, you make it as close as possible. So there's a certain estimation that's okay. But so sometimes the combination of the science and the procedures or the technological advancements are helpful. Sometimes we set aside precision as long as the halacha categories are followed. And here we come to this idea of intent, right? Because there is something that that artificial intelligence does seem to lack a soul. Although one of the questions that have been asked to this ChatGPT is, do you want to be human? And the response is yes. And why do you want to be human? Because humans make mistakes and are imperfect. And the answer is because human beings have the ability to grow. This is some kind of like, some kind of very, some type of deep discussions taking place, as well as some creepy and scary discussions about whether or not they'll take over the universe or not. I keep thinking about HAL in, 2001: A Space Odyssey. One of these days, the rise of the machines. But so sometimes technological advancements that help us with precision are helpful. Sometimes they're optional. Sometimes they could be employed. And here we're going to switch to this idea of intuition or the human element that and how that will play itself out. Any other questions, reactions, thoughts before we move on? Okay, so here we come to the ChatGPT Rabbi. Right, there was an article, it was in the foreword, it was all covered by a whole bunch of other media outlets, and here it's from Business Insider from, it's 2/16/23. Can't be 2/26/23 because that's Sunday. So it's a typo, it's from 2/16/23, last week. A rabbi in New York wrote a 1,000-word sermon using ChatGPT and said the AI might be smart, but it isn't empathetic enough to put preachers out of work. Rabbi Joshua Franklin was seen in a video dated January 1, telling this congregation of the Jewish Center of the Hamptons that he was reading a plagiarized sermon to them. He later revealed it was written by ChatGPT. Now you're clapping. I'm deathly afraid, Rabbi Franklin told his congregation when they applauded after the sermon. I thought truck drivers are going to go long before the rabbi in terms of losing our positions to artificial intelligence. Franklin told the Associated Press that the ChatGPT sermon was based on a portion of the Torah about intimacy and vulnerability. Franklin told the AP that his congregation guessed the sermon was written by really wise, smart, thoughtful individuals. But he added that while ChatGPT may be intelligent, it cannot be compassionate and it cannot love. ChatGPT might be really great at sounding intelligent, but the question is, can it be empathetic? And that, not yet, at least, it can't, added Franklin. So it's smart, it's wise, it presents information, it presents Torah, but it lacks a human touch. And this idea of the human touch is something that when we talk about the role of transmission, the role of Mesorah, becomes very critical. Because we know that we have, especially we're in the weeks where we're reading about the giving of the commandments, the giving of the law, the giving of the Torah. It was essential for it to be passed from God to Moshe to the people, and it would pass on through the generations. We also have the rabbinic tradition, the rabbis as the bearers of the tradition, the interpreters of the tradition, and the like. And so when we come to the end of the Torah in Devarim, where there's a recap of what's taking place, and as the story of the Jewish people pivots from those who received the Torah from Moshe's involvement to how things are going to work in the future, we encounter a verse, one of my favorite verses in the Torah, source number 7. You shall act in accordance with the instructions given you and the ruling handed down to you. You must not deviate from the verdict that they announced to you, either to the right or to the left. The mitzvah to listen to the rabbis. And the language that's utilized is that you shouldn't deviate from the right or the left. And Rashi has the famous explanation: if the rabbis tell you that left is right and right is left, they're right, even if they're patently wrong. So how do we understand this idea of the role of the rabbinic leadership to pass on the tradition? So this is from the Ramban's commentary, Nachmanides, also source number 7. Now, the need for this commandment is very great, for the Torah was given to us in a written form, and it is known that not all opinions concur on newly arising matters. We have a Torah, but we have reality, and not everything is in the Torah. Disagreements would thus increase, and the one Torah would become many Torahs. Scripture, therefore, defined the law that we are to obey the great court that stands before God in the place that he chose, and whatever they tell us with respect to the interpretation of the Torah. Right, the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, men of the Great Assembly, the Sanhedrin, whether they received its interpretation by means of witness from witness until Moses, who heard it from the mouth of the Almighty. The rabbis may be the ones who have recorded that tradition straight back to Sinai, or whether they said so based on the implication of the written words of the Torah or its intent. For it was subject to their judgment that he gave them the Torah, even if their judgment appears to you to exchange right for left. And surely you are obligated to think that they say right what is truly right, because God's Spirit is upon, and this is quoting a verse in Isaiah, the ministers of his sanctuary, and he forsaketh not his saints, they are preserved forever from error and stumbling. In the language of the Sifrei, even if they show you before your own eyes that right is left and left is right, obey them. And here I bolded the line, is subject to their judgment, because the Ramban seems to be focusing on the specific role of the rabbi, the interpreter of the tradition, as essential to the Torah being passed from generation to generation into the future. And it requires it to be a rabbi, the ministers of his sanctuary. These are people, these are human beings who are critical to the transmission of Mesorah of Torah from the past into the present, forward into the future. So it becomes the idea, the Ramban recognizes that there's going to be a human element that is required, a rabbinic leadership, a spiritual leadership that is required to make things relevant. Now, often today, our teachers are books. But those books are the books that come from the rabbis. There's an interesting discussion. They talk about the requirement to respect one's rabbi. And the idea, who is one's rabbi? People have lots of rabbis. But some people may only have one rabbi they ever consult with, so then you know who their main rabbi is. But what about people who have live in different communities, have different teachers? So they talk about what's called the Rabbo Muvhak, your main teacher. And so these days, the main teacher might be books, because as much as we learn from a particular rabbi, we're in someone's class for a number of years, or in someone's shul for a number of years, a lot of our information is coming from the books that we read, that are written by other rabbis. So that this is not about that only rabbis are where we get valid Torah information, but rabbis are the source of the information that has shaped the tradition and how it's going to be interpreted. And questions of Jewish law require their judgment, because they are in place of the ministers of the Lord and from the temple, and they're the ones who are given this special spirit not to be, not to err, not to make errors, and not to stumble. And so there's a certain human element that's distinctly human. It's talking about people, rabbis. It's talking about the spiritual leaders. Doesn't mean that people can't make their own decisions and people can't turn to non-rabbis for decisions. But from a traditional perspective, it is the qualified rabbi who knows the information, who knows the person, who is then able to set the to make the decision, to make the legal precedent, to require or obligate his followers in the course of action. And for the Ramban, it's something that's very human. And so from a ChatGPT perspective, the ChatGPT, like what they joke and call Rabbi Google, is a great source of information, but it doesn't have Mesorah. It's not part of the formal tradition. So that's the Ramban's understanding. And Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein takes this into kind of the contemporary condition. And Rabbi Lichtenstein had an article about the human and social factor in halacha, because when we talk about a Jewish law, well, we have books on Jewish law and we have questions and answers in Jewish law, but this idea sometimes of what Rabbi Lichtenstein is talking about, the idea of a posek. Right? A posek is a decisor in Jewish law. People have questions and they go to the posek for an answer. And so Rabbi Lichtenstein is addressing a couple of different issues in the article, and we'll see pieces of it in the selection here. This idea that in general, is the standard posek going to be someone who's more strict or more lenient? As well as the fact is, can you have two people ask the same question, get a different answer? And he talks about how often you would think that the person who knows the most and will want the answer to the question to satisfy most of the opinions might be more strict. Right? Because if you want the course of action to be in line with as many opinions as possible, you have to factor in the stricter opinions, because those opinions require a stricter course of action, while the more lenient approaches will be excluding the stricter courses of action. So Rabbi Lichtenstein talks about the possibility that you would think that the stricter course of action would be the more common one. And he also begins to talk about this idea of if it's the same question, how can it be? Does there have to be one answer, or is there a human element at play? And he addresses both of those factors in this selection. So let's look at source number 8.
Rabbi, I have a
Yes.
question. What is one to do when rabbis are in conflict with each other?
So we'll get to that also.
Okay.
So the cogency and legitimacy of a human approach to psak, right? Psak is halachic decision making, appears to many problematic. How can there be a human element? There's a question, there's an answer. They would have us believe that the ideal posek is a faceless and heartless supercomputer into whom all of the relevant data is fed and who then produces the right answer. Should the standard not be met, the shortfall is to be regarded as a failing, the lamentable result of human frailty. On this reading, the process of Pesika, properly conceived and executed, bears no semblance to an existential encounter between seeker and respondent. It entails rather the application of text to problem, the coupling of code and situation. Right, so it's interesting that Rav Lichtenstein is invoking these technological terms. You would think it's a super, plug in the information, get out the answer. It is coupling of code and situation. Right? There's a system to this. It's an if-then statement. This conception does not necessarily preclude reckoning with the specific circumstances of the question and questioner, as these may very well be part of the relevant objective data. Right? The prevailing tendency, however, would be to dwarf this factor And as to the human aspect of the meshiv, of the responder, that would be obviated entirely. He, for his part, is to be animated by the precept that we do not have mercy in judgment. Right? Give an answer, make it the right answer, the straight answer, and hence to pass on the merits of the issue with imperviously stony objectivity. Purist proponents of this approach often cry it up as the frum view of psika, right? The more frum religious view of answering religious halachic questions. So Rabbi Lichtenstein says that on the one hand, you might approach Jewish legal decision-making as really an equation. Here's the issue. This is what Jewish law says about that type of an issue. Plug it in, run the data, run the equation, spit out the answer. And because, how can there be any kind of deviation? There's a situation, there's a law, it's an equation. That's what he presents is how many might perceive it, and many do perceive it. He says, however, that in reality, this portrait of a posek is mere caricature. Lin by those who at most karu v'shanu, but certainly lo shimshu. Right? You may get this by reading the material, right? They've read it, but lo shimshu means they've never put it into practice. Theoretically, yes. If this is the case and this is the law, then this is the answer. As anyone who's been privileged to observe Gedolim, giants, great scholars at close hand can readily attest, they approach Psak doubly animated by responsibility to halacha and sensitivity to human concerns. It's not so. It's not an equation. It's very much a human situation. The operative rule, Rabbi so-and-so is worthy of being relied upon b'shat hatchak under exigent circumstances, is clearly predicated upon the assumption that a posek can recognize an hour of need and may strive to respond to it. Implicit in this formulation is the concept of a differential psak, the principle that divergent answers may be given to identical halakhic questions depending upon the attendant human and social circumstances. Right? He goes on to quote examples of this as situations that they talk about various poskim being confronted by questions about a chicken. Right, that was often the case. You find something wrong with the chicken. So a woman comes to the rabbi with a chicken, a question about a wound in the stomach. The rabbi says, it's treif, you can't use it. Woman comes with the same type of a question, situation. The rabbi says, you can use it. The rabbi was asked, how can it be? How can they both be right, right? Like you're right, and you're right too. How can that be possible? How can it be same situation, two different questions? He said, look, I understood that the first woman seemed to be coming out of a situation that it wasn't such a big deal. And if she had to throw away the chicken, she threw away the chicken and she was ready to do that. I got a different vibe from the second person based on her question and her tone and the situation in the home. I got a sense that it was pretty important that it would be a much bigger loss entailed for her to have to throw away the chicken. So I said she could use the chicken. There's sometimes the same question has different answers. So Rabbi Lichtenstein is pointing out very much, and I just find it very interesting. 1998, he's using that same type of terminology, the supercomputer, the equation, that it's mathematical, that it's machine-like. And the answer is it's not. It requires very much a humane approach and analysis of the situation to be able to respond. Now, this can lead to different answers to the same question. Obviously, different rabbis will have different approaches, and that's part of the complexity of Jewish law. For the individual, it's often the case to choose a rabbi, and then you'll have you'll have at least a uniform approach by that one rabbi to the various questions. Right? The Jewish legal system frowns on hopping around, rabbi shopping to get the answer that you want. But I think the way from the transmission of the tradition, based on the way the Ramban puts it, is that we will, the way the Nachmanides puts it, is that part of that tradition is you connect yourself to a rabbi, to a community, to an approach to Judaism, and that's the approach taken. Once upon a time, there was a more consolidated system that worked. Over time, that's become much less prevalent, and that there is a certainly in the Orthodox community you don't have the committee for Orthodox law and standards for everybody to follow. Conservative Judaism still has a little bit about like that. They have the committee on law and standards that addresses certain questions. That's where that's the origin in conservative Judaism for a number of the paths or decisions that as a movement they've taken, which kind of have veered them away from traditional halachic practice. But ultimately, it's about connecting oneself to a community. And Jewish law does recognize that there's minhag hamakom, certain practices are in certain places, but bottom line is one should try to be as consistent as possible. But we see that, yes, a rabbi may find the ChatGPT helpful in spitting back some information that could be relevant, interesting, and elevating. At the same time, Jewish law and the passing of the tradition requires a certain human element, both in terms of the expositors of the tradition, this idea of Masorah, passing from generation to the next, and in each individual situation, there is what the law says, but also how the law can be applied. The way Rav Lichtenstein feels that it is, very logical and very common to think of it as an equation that can have information spit in and spit back out, but that's not really what it is. Every situation is different. That requires very much a human sensitivity, which machines don't quite have just yet. Questions,
Rabbi,
comments, reactions? Yes,
Rabbi,
Rose.
What did I want to say? Oh, nothing, not about halacha so much, but very early on when we learned 10 mefarshim, on something. They all differ in their views also, and it's to show the human side of, that we are not looking at these people as divinic. They're human, and whatever times they lived in is for where they have influence for their shita or their perush, so.
Right, look, the diversity of opinion is also something human. It's interesting how, if you would ask ChatGPT for give me the 20 mefarshim on X, it probably could spit it back to you. It's really more in trying to filter that information into a path for actual living that becomes a little bit more challenging. Whether that's how to respond to the unique, the specific situation that could emerge, or based on Al's question before, how do you navigate the different views? That becomes a little bit more challenging without I think of the Tin Man, right? If I only had a heart, it becomes a little bit more challenging there. And the other questions or reactions? So I think that, there was an article a couple of weeks ago, an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal by Noam Neusner, that only bad writers should fear ChatGPT, right? So what's going to happen? Well, people are only going to rely on this more. And, some will feel like, people get more and more information from artificial intelligence rather than from people. So people seem to think that OpenAI's ChatGPT, a chatbot powered by artificial intelligence, is going to put many writers out of business or make writing bland, or both. But perhaps that's not a bad thing. With the rise of the internet, we're inundated with more writing than ever, and most of it is mediocre. Maybe robots should get a shot taking over some of this workday prose. I think people feel robot writers because they do their job well, maybe even better than humans do. Some will contend that ChatGPT's skills are limited and lacking in style, but so what? Sure, it can write a masterful piece of prose or a profound novel, but most of what we read isn't that good anyway, even the stuff written by people. As long as artificial intelligence produces instruction manuals that are clear and corporate policies that provide direction, that's good enough for me. Whether you want them or not, the robot writers are coming. Soon we'll be able to generate solid writing as easy as we use internet search engines. We'll get practical results that work for practical purposes. But when something new or weighty needs to be shared, we will turn to human writers who have the gift of conveying the unexpressed thought in words that are original and artful. That's the kind of writing humans should do. And if that's our destiny, we should embrace it, even if fewer of us do the work. Right? The idea that it's less for information that we actually need people for more and more these days, but we still need them more for the inspiration, for the soul, for the heart. And that is something that will not be easy, that we will not be able to get that just from ChatGPT. And yes, to have articles written, they may be a dime a dozen, quite literally, from being plugged into a ChatGPT exchange. Just like we get a lot of information from Google. But if we're looking for that to be interpreted and synthesized and filtered into a way to live a more inspired life, well, that still requires the human touch. And so, we think we're going to be looking for original and artful and inspirational and emotional ways of taking that information and synthesizing it into action, that we still are going to need human beings. And you know what? We may get more ChatGPT divrei Torah or sermons or articles or manuals, but that's not going to change. So maybe you need, it's going to kind of be a certain survival of the fittest, but in this situation, you don't have the ability to rely upon the machine or the artificial intelligence to inspire and to elevate and the like. And that's still going to be something that's necessary, that we're going to be utilizing human beings for a long time to come. So if we rabbis want to continue to be useful, we better be human, we better be inspiring, we better be able to synthesize the emotion. Otherwise, there's plenty of other sources of information out there. And I would imagine the brave new world in which we live in will continue to get more and more complex. Maybe it requires a yearly class on this topic to catch up with what the innovations are. But for now, we keep living and learning and growing and striving and hopefully inspiring.
Amen.